Nicholas Glover, Vice President of Advocacy for the Tampa Bay Chamber. I want to thank and welcome the viewers tuning into the Tampa Bay Chamber's focused conversation on Amendment 2, Raising Florida's Minimum Wage. The Tampa Bay Chamber focuses on policy, not politics. And while we do not endorse candidates, and we don't typically take positions on amendments either, this conversation will serve as a means to make sure that our members in the business community are informed on the key considerations of Amendment 2. Today, we are very excited to welcome two speakers. The first speaker will provide a pro-Amendment 2 perspective, and our second speaker will provide the opposite viewpoint. At this time, I'd like to welcome Roxey Nelson and Samantha Padgett. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our speakers are so accomplished. I will embarrass them for just a little bit and read their bios. They are impressive, and I think it's important that our members know that you are extremely accomplished individuals with great viewpoints and wonderful pedigree. So Roxey currently serves as Vice President of Politics and Strategic Campaigns for 1199 SEIU, United Healthcare Workers East. In her current role, Roxey is responsible for strategic management and execution of all internal and external campaigns for cultivation of staff and member leadership development and all short and long-term organizational growth strategies. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and government from Rutgers University in New Jersey and a master's degree in organization development from Pepperdine University in, I believe, Malibu. Samantha Padgett serves as General Counsel for the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association. In her role, she provides legal advice and services to the association and to its leadership, and serves as a key advocate for the restaurant and lodging industries at the federal, state, and local level. She graduated cum laude from the University of Florida's College of Law and received her bachelor's degree from Emory University in Atlanta. Ladies, again, thank you so much for being with us. Roxey, we'll start with you. Please, if you will, take just an opportunity to talk for a moment about your perspective on Amendment 2 as you see it.
Happy to. Thanks so much for having us to the Tampa Chamber and to Nicholas for the invitation. I want to start out by just sharing a little bit about my own story to really clarify what brings me to the organization that I'm with and my understanding about the importance of policies like Amendment 2. I'm an immigrant of this country. I was born on an island called Grenada, immigrated to New Jersey in the 80s. Like most, many immigrant experiences, there's a way that sort of families get separated and as people make their way to start a new life. My mom and I lived together, raised by a single mother in New Jersey. We had a lot of extended family, but basically it was her and I. And my whole entire life, I remember my mother providing everything for me. And even though I knew it was a strain on her, I watched her do whatever it took so that I could, have the Halloween costume I wanted, the birthday party I wanted. I could play summer ball and fall ball and do all the things that young people growing up want to do. And around my preteens, I started to notice just the level of stress on my mother. The pressure from working two jobs at that point, since we'd been in America for about a decade, was starting to show. And when she was about what my age is now, I didn't know what it was, but I knew she was going to the doctor and she was getting medicine. What I know now is high blood pressure, but I didn't know the technical aspects of it, but I knew that the burden of needing to work two jobs in support of her family and myself particularly was a strain on her. And what that did for me as a young person was it encouraged me. I felt like at around 15, 16, when it was able to work, that I needed to get a job. And so as many young people do in New Jersey, I went to the mall, which we have many of, and I got my first job at the Gap, early 90s. And I remember the pay was $9.56 was the pay at the Gap in the early 90s. My first job, I was 15. in high school. And I was excited. I went home to my mom. I got my job. I was going to help. I would be able to release some, I could pay for the movies and the little things and the extras that then maybe she wouldn't have to stress as much. And I remember, after my first week of work, I came to the car and I was like, I think they messed up my paycheck. It's not, it's not adding up. And she helped me and talked me through taxes. And I was like, oh man. But really learning about the importance of work, and, doing my part to support my mother and my family and myself. And that has been that lesson, that formative moment of watching my mother struggle has been formative for me. So now I'm about her age. It's 30 years later. So I'm about her age she was then, now. And I basically, I've done it, right? I can take care of myself. I feel secure. And I know that when my mom retires in a few years that I will be able to help take care of her. But then that moment makes me think about the reality of Amendment 2, right? 30 years ago, when I was 15, the pay that I got as a 15-year-old is $1 more than what our minimum wage is right now. $8.56 is what we're talking about. And as I think about that, that's $1,400 a month. About 200,000 Floridians make that much, making a minimum wage, and that's about $20,000 a year. And I ask the people who are listening to me to really sit with that and think about you and your family and ask yourself, can I live on that? Could I live on that? And the truth is, there's no debate about that, the answer to that question. The answer is no. We as grown people cannot, in this day and age, 30 years after I, as a teenager, to help out my mother, was making $1 more, expect the people, grown people who care for families, to survive on $8.56 an hour. And so I think for me, as I come to this conversation, it's less about, a debate, right? We know the truth. The truth is, it is not possible for a grown person, right, who's living in America today, here in Florida today, to make ends meet, to pursue life, liberty, and the American way, right, on $8.56 an hour, $1,400 a month, $20,000 a year. It's not possible. And if everybody looks into their own knowing, we know that. The question that stands here before us today, and I'm coming in front of the chamber and I'm thinking to myself, what can I say, to speak to the things that I know, personal interests, business interests would understand and relate to, aside from the reality of what I know everybody already knows to be true, right? And oftentimes what we'll hear is an argument about how raising the wage will hurt business. And what I say to that, I think there are 3 points that speak to really why businesses and why we're talking about Florida, unifying Florida businesses for a living wage around Amendment 2 to vote yes on Amendment 2, is that workers, your workers, are customers. Workers are customers. And I believe it was Henry Ford that knew this best, right? Low wages depress demand. And if you expect there to be a market for your product, you need a robust consumer base, right? It's basics. The second thing I would say, point I would make is if you talk to your HR people and your development people and your recruitment people, what they know to be true, and I think what you know to be true, is that the cost of turnover, right, to pay the one of the core drivers of the cost of turnover is low wages, right? And so to me, again, it is not an understanding or a debate about whether or not it's smart to pay a living wage. The question, it is still a question of value, because in some businesses will opt, right, to pay the cost in turnover, what it is to retrain, what it is to acculturate, what it is to, to onboard someone all over again. Those are costs. So we would rather pay those costs than paying people a living wage on the front end, right? That is not about scarcity or in the system. That's not about a lack of resource to do it. It's about a value choice. The third thing I would say is I would think about COVID-19 and essential workers in this moment, right? And I represent healthcare workers, nursing home workers, ancillary hospital staff, janitors, retail workers, restaurant workers, those very people who we called essential. And I feel like it is really easy to say someone is essential, but if you really want to treat workers as if they're essential, what we learned to be true in March, April, and May, farm workers, you need to pay them a wage so they can live with dignity, like my mother needed. And the fourth thing I want to talk about and point that I think is really important for us to understand is a lot of times companies call me. I have friends, I do organizational development work, and I have lots of friends in that space. And the hot thing right now everybody's talking about is organizational equity and inclusion, diversity. Well, you know what a company can do to really affirm their belief in diversity and inclusion in our country today? Pay a living wage, pay a fair wage, because who benefits from that? People of color, Black people, Latinx people, women benefit, because most of them are the 200,000 workers in Florida making a minimum wage. And so for me, right, what we're talking about here is raising the wage over the next 5 years from $8.56 in 2021 to $10, and then 1 year until it hits 15, and then it goes back to an inflationary increase that's in the constitutions as it is right now. So for all those reasons, right, from the knowing that we have to the depths of us when it's quiet, and we think about the reality of $8.56 an hour, $1,400 a month, $20,000 a year, and if we can or cannot make that work, we know what the truth is. And the question for us is, what values are we going to live into? Are we going to live into a value that prioritizes the few over the many? Or are we going to start valuing and putting the interests of the many on par with the interests of the few? And I think that's the question that's before our business leaders today as we consider our support for Amendment 2. Thank you.
Roxey, thank you so much for that overview. You mentioned COVID. Let's talk a little bit about the timing of the amendment. So, right, with COVID ravaging the U.S. economy, particularly for small businesses, is now the right time to raise Florida's minimum wage?
That question's for me?
Yes.
The question, I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful of your question. I think the answer is yes. I think now is the right time to raise the minimum wage, because I think COVID has shown us that not paying people a living wage makes them more vulnerable and makes all of us more vulnerable, right? To me, COVID has been the strongest case for why people need to have the ability to put away a little extra every month, why living paycheck to paycheck is a greater strain on our system, because people will need assistance faster, right? So I think COVID completely makes the case for the business case for, the logical case for, if we're thinking about it collectively, for raising the wage. But I will say, if we think about it that way, the way that you asked and framed the question, like if it's something that can wait, why should it wait? And like I've said, it's not that there isn't money in the system. There are so many ways we as professionals and business people understand and think about abundance. And we know there's abundance in the world and there's abundance in the system, but we treat, when it comes to wages and labor, we only look at it from scarcity. And I think that the question that business leaders have before them is one of belief, values, and morals. and how we're going to approach our business strategies to make sure that we're leaning into strategies that really believe in and come from a place of making sure the least of these, right, the folks that are doing the work, right, that are producing, are able to then, put back into the economy. The thing that we also know about low wage workers is that when they get money in their hands and put it in their pockets, they spend it, right? It's what Henry Ford knew, right? They create the robust consumer base. And so I think it's short-sighted. It is a short-sighted view that it's one thing or the other thing, right? That paying workers a living wage somehow takes away from the ability to make a profit, right? The framework of the question, gives me pause.
So Roxey, you mentioned abundance, and let's talk about that for a second. Might raising Florida's minimum wage have what some opponents are saying as widespread unintended consequences, from job elimination to reduced hours and benefits? And they would point to examples of cities that have done this, right? In Seattle, where some things have worked well, and there have been some examples of these job losses. How do you talk about that in terms of this argument?
I think you can always find an example to counter a point, right? There are lots of examples. What I know from working in labor and negotiating contracts, that's the argument that's always made. And in my, decade and a half of doing that work, it's never happened. Never happened. People are going to have to get laid off. People are going to be, it never happens. And I also think in Florida, we don't have to guess. In 2004, there was just a Palm Beach article in 2004 when the minimum wage was raised to $6.15. The same analysis was made. The bottom's going to fall out. People, they're going to have to let people go. Businesses are going to shut down. It didn't happen. You know what happened in 2005, right? The 200,000 more jobs were created. The unemployment rate dropped. That's what the reality is. So I understand. I'm not saying that there aren't cases somewhere in the world where the market conditions, environmental conditions made it a perfect storm that people raise the minimum wage and then some businesses. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying the evidence that we've seen over and over again is that an increase in the minimum wage, oftentimes has positive consequences on the economy. In the number of in increases in the number of people working, it's good, and as well as the number of people, what people are making, and so their spending and buying power increases.
Thank you so much. So Samantha, let's turn it over to you now. Let's start by talking about your perspective on Amendment 2.
Thank you so much, Nicholas. I appreciate the opportunity to share with the Tampa Chamber today, and Ms. Nelson makes an incredibly charismatic and incredibly dynamic point. And I want to start by saying the tourism industry, we are driven by our people. When you come to the state of Florida, yes, you stay on lovely properties and you eat wonderful food, but when you go home, what you remember is those face-to-face interactions with the people that serve you and that dedicate themselves to making sure that you enjoy your visitation. And so we understand and we value our workers, and we know that it can't just be about dollar signs. It can't just be about the bottom line. It is about the people, because that is what makes our hospitality industry in Florida so very special. And I don't want that to get lost in what I need to talk about, which is the impact to business. And I make that argument. None of that reduces what Ms. Nelson put forward as the potential impact to people, but it is the business that provides the job. And we have to look from a practical perspective about what that impact is. And so, yes, when the minimum wage previously went up, it went up $1.25. And there were dire predictions. And it's true that we did not see those dire predictions come to pass. But it was $1.25, and then it was raised for inflation, and never did you see quite that level of increase. What we're talking about here is a 76% increase in the cost of labor over a period of 5 years. And if you depend on tipped employees, it's even more than that. It's 116% cost increase in the cost of labor. And that is just for the hours for those minimum wage workers. We'll talk about some other impacts to that a little bit in just a little bit. But I ask for people to think about in your personal life, if your mortgage was to go up 76%, if your car payment was to go up 76%, you're going to have to make adjustments in your life to meet that cost increase. It doesn't matter how much you love your home and how much you love your car, you have to make adjustments because that money comes from somewhere. And often the businesses we're talking about are businesses that operate on the margins, especially when you look at smaller businesses, mom and pop locations, the small locations, your community proprietors. They are operating on the margins, and the 76% cost increase is a very real thing. And what we do see, and we've had a couple economic studies done, and we've looked at what the impacts have been in other cities. And what we do anticipate is the potential for the layoff of entry-level workers and the reduction in benefits and hours. And what we see in that is that the very people that this seeks to help will be the first people that feel the pain of ballot amendment 2. There'll be a devastating impact to younger workers and first-time job seekers. And as Ms. Nelson was talking about her experience in the Gap, I think about all of the first-time workers, how many people's first job was as a server in a restaurant, was as a retail worker in the Gap, was helping out on a community farm during the summertime. And it's those first experiences that shape people's work ethic, that starts them thinking about how they function in a workplace. And when you start pricing them out of the market at $15 an hour, those jobs become more competitive. And you have, like I said, you're going to price those folks out of the market. And then how do we provide those job experiences, those beginning experiences to those workers? Female workers will lose 2/3 of the estimated jobs lost if Amendment 2 is to pass. But it's not just the workers that will feel the impact. Those costs are passed on to consumers. So as you see, minimum wage workers who may lose wages or have their hours reduced, they will then be paying more for consumer goods. The increase in the cost of consumer good is also more concerning in the state of Florida, where we have a very vibrant and growing senior population, folks that have fixed incomes and that can't necessarily absorb the increased costs in consumer goods. I want to go back to talk about it. You know, when we talk about the 76% cost increase in wages, that is merely for those hourly wages when you make that estimation. But those aren't the only folks that will feel the pinch of ballot amendment 2. So as Roxy mentioned, Ms. Nelson mentioned, of course, the minimum wage in Florida is currently $8.56. So let's say you have a very loyal worker in your restaurant or in your location that's been with you for several years and has received several raises, but they make $13 or $14 an hour. If now you have on day one an inexperienced worker that's going to come in and make $15 an hour, how are you as an employer going to have to adjust your pay scale to make sure that you are continuing to show that individual who's been with you that they are valued and that their loyalty and service for a number of years is commensurate, their pay is commensurate to that loyalty and service. And so you'll see what we call wage compression. That will push those wage costs up incrementally. And that's an additional cost that isn't even considered when I talk about the 76% cost in labor expenses. COVID has destroyed over 330,000 direct and hotel supported jobs. And economists estimate another 158,000 jobs will be lost if this amendment passes. When we first started talking seriously about ballot amendment 2 back in March, before this all hit, I think you did have some concern amongst employers as they wanted to, as they're thinking about the impact of what is the appearance of this. And they were hesitant to talk to their workers because they didn't want it to look like they didn't want their workers to prosper and didn't want them to have fair wages, even though all the employers I've talked to understand that they need to have they need to have well-paid workers in order to have a successful business. But what we've seen with COVID is the breakdown in that barrier. We've seen the reality hits where people don't look at these hotels and restaurants as necessarily being very profitable and very prosperous, because I'll be very honest with you, right now they're not. And we see these very honest conversations happening between employers and their employees, and they're talking to their employee about, it's not that I don't want to give you a raise. It's not that I don't want to pay you. It's that I don't know how I'm going to pay anything next month. And so you talk about the impact of COVID. I do think COVID has brought to light the service that these employees do and how valuable they are to the function of business and the service they provide to our communities, certainly. But I think we also need to pay attention to what the impact has been to business and the necessity for all of our communities that businesses are able to be resilient and recover from COVID. And I will be honest with you that the impact of Amendment 2 was going to be devastating to some businesses prior to the pandemic. In the wake of the pandemic, I won't even say in the wake, we're still in the middle of this pandemic. We're still feeling the effects. There is no certain end date for when this stops being the pandemic. And I think we have to be very honest that we have to be realistic about what this means for our employers and what our businesses in the state of Florida. And that significant additional impact may not mean that they have fewer employees. It may mean that they no longer provide any jobs because they have to close their doors. And when you don't have any job to provide, and when those doors are closed, then there's no worker and there's also no customer. You've just eliminated that job. You've eliminated that business. So I want to talk about, we talk about the language of the amendment, that it's $1 a year. And I think most people that don't have the opportunity to listen to a back and forth and both sides of this issue, going into the ballot box and looking at that, will look at that and say, you know what, that seems reasonable to me. I'd want to make $1 more a year. I think my neighbors should make $1 more a year. And I think it's great that your members have the opportunity to hear both sides of it. And what I would say to you is that $1 a year isn't just $1 a year, that it has a potential impact on the ability of that business to continue to grow, thrive, and provide jobs and provide opportunities in the state of Florida. But it's not just about that $1 a year. I invite all of Floridians to look at their sample ballot and to read the language of the amendment carefully. It also talks about the negative impact to the state budget as a whole. It says it may result in higher taxes or loss of government service. It says the cost to state and local government will be an additional $540 million annually in wages. And that's just, again, for those minimum wage hours, starting in 2027. Government actions to mitigate these costs, and this is language directly from the ballot, government actions to mitigate these costs are unlikely to produce material savings. This means that every Floridian, whether or not they are a minimum wage worker or not, could potentially feel the pain of ballot amendment 2 by a reduction in government service or an increase in taxes because of the additional costs that government will be subject to. And again, this is just the costs to state and local government. This doesn't talk about what the costs are in the broader state and local economy. We have seen from the experiences in Seattle and the like, and you'll see if you go to our website, we highlight the case of a woman named Simone Barron, who actually fought for the $15 an hour minimum wage. She was a server for over 2 decades in Seattle. And she went from having one job where she worked 4 days a week, and that job allowed her to raise her family and raise her daughter and have flexibility in her schedule to do the things that she wanted to do. And after that $15 an hour minimum wage passed, she then went to 2 jobs, 6 days a week, still not making the same amount of money because it was perceived that she made enough money for $15 an hour. Those tips were reduced and those costs had to be absorbed by the businesses she worked for, so her hours were reduced. There is a significant impact to the business and thus to its workers when you have a $15 an hour minimum wage. There is no question that ballot amendment 2, that its intentions are noble and that what it aims to do is positive. But the practical impact for the business and thus for the employee is overall not a positive. And we do think that it has the potential to hurt not only those employees, but those businesses and also the general citizenry of the state of Florida. And so we ask your members and ask businesses to consider, and citizens to consider, all of those impacts when they decide whether or not they should vote for Amendment 2 or oppose Amendment 2.
Thank you for that. So Samantha, proponents of raising Florida's minimum wage would argue that it's not simply a matter of impact feasibility, right? It's not just an economic issue, but that it's a moral imperative. Do you agree?
I think you can't do it you can't think of either thing in a vacuum. That I think it is a moral imperative to pay people fairly and to pay them the wages, but I think you have to consider along what the impact is to the business as a whole and to society as a whole. I think that many of these jobs were not, I'm going to say that the unpopular thing that you're not supposed to say, and that is many of these jobs were not designed for somebody to raise a family on. They were designed to be entry-level jobs. They were designed to be training wages. They were designed to be first jobs, not forever jobs. And I think we have a larger issue that can't be necessarily debated or solved within this context of how do we help all of our workers to get beyond that first job? And how do we make sure that this isn't the only opportunity? And how do we create opportunities beyond that? What I have enjoyed so much about what I enjoy about working for the hospitality industry is talking to restaurant owners, hotel managers that started as servers, as busboys, and as hostesses and front desk clerks. And within this industry, through their own initiative, they have worked their way up. And they have become these very successful folks within this industry, but they have started at the bottom. And they've done it, they didn't necessarily go to college. They didn't necessarily get a business degree. They did it through their own hard work and initiative. And we want to make sure that our industry continues to thrive so that we can continue to be that source of opportunity and that place where people start and work their way up.
Thank you. So the Palm Beach Post actually noted earlier this year that the United Way publishes an ALICE report for states. ALICE is an acronym that, of course, stands for the Asset Limited Income Constrained Employed. ALICE households are households who are earning something above the poverty level, but much less than a living wage. This year's report shows that only about 54% of Florida's households earn enough money to make ends meet. If raising the minimum wage is not the solution, then in your view, Samantha, what is?
I think there are many things that could be the solution. I think the question in front of us, whether or not that ballot amendment 2 is that solution. And I don't believe that it is. I believe that it tackles only one small sliver of this broader issue, and that the impacts and the results of this amendment don't actually solve this problem. When they were considering legislation at the federal level to increase the minimum wage across the nation to $15 an hour, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office released a report that said raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour would lift over 1 million people out of poverty. And I think we have to pay attention that that's 1 million people out of poverty. That is not nothing. That is a very important figure, but at the same time, it would leave over 1 million people without a job. And what that tells me is that this is a difficult issue and that there are many aspects of it to consider, but that under no circumstances is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour without consequence and without downside.
So Samantha, where could our viewers go to learn more information about the FRLA's perspective and other opponents of Amendment 2? Where should they go for more information?
We would recommend you visit www.amendment2, and that's the number 2, hurtsyou.com. And there's also social media attached to that as well, but that will give you the impact of Amendment 2 to workers, to communities, and talk a little bit more about the issues that I've discussed today.
Thank you. And Roxey, where should folks who are passionate about making sure that the least of their neighbors go to find out more information on the SEIU's perspective as well as others?
Nicholas, if you would, I know that you're going to send out some materials to your members after this. We have a pledge for Florida businesses for a fair wage. And it's also a website that folks can go to get more information. And if you would send that out after, people will be able to access it. My brain won't let me recall the URL right now.
We will absolutely send that out. And Roxey, I'll provide just about 2 minutes, if you would, if you'd like to wrap up some final comments.
Yeah, this was, I really appreciate the dialogue and the invitation. And I wish there was more time to keep dialoguing, because your comments really, made me want to sort of be in a deeper conversation around this issue. I think that the three things, a couple of things that I would leave with that was inspired by the comments just provided is I want folks to, like I said at the start of my presentation, we know people can't live, no one can live on $8.56 an hour, $1,400 a month, $20,000 a year. It's not possible. And I hear the representative accepting that premise is true. And I don't hear another solution. I hear that the ask is to allow those people to continue to suffer while we figure it out. But what I want to say that I want people to lift up from my story is I was talking about 1993. Almost 30 years, business had the opportunity to find a solution. And it has not. And it will never do it, because that is not the imperative of business, if we're being honest with ourselves. The truth is, as a body politic, as a civil society, it's about choices. And what values we are going to prioritize. And I submit that in this moment of a global pandemic, where we're calling frontline workers and caregivers essential, that the thing we should prioritize is their resilience, not just the resilience of business, which is important and critical part of their resilience, but we should do it from the framework of individual human resilience, the people that you're serving's resilience. And for them to be resilient, it cannot start with the minimum wage. It has to be a fair wage. The other thing I would say is, as I think back to my story, Sister talked about the fact that these jobs were not intended to be lifelong jobs. They were for entry-level, first-time workers, first starter jobs. Well, maybe that's true. But the economic system and environment we've created have made them long-term jobs. For the last 2 decades, we've been saying this, and it has not been dealt with. And so in that format, we're thinking about the certified nursing assistants. They're not starter jobs. These are vocations that are getting the pay of an average of $11 an hour for that work, taking care of our grandmothers and our loved ones at the end of their lives. This is a question of values. This is a question of valuing what you're paying for, and doing so in a way that acknowledges the dignity of the people who are doing the work, but setting up a system that can be sustained with them earning a living wage. That's the challenge before us. It's not just to make sure the business survives, which is critical, but we have to flip how we're thinking about it as a society. So there's a lot more I could say and would love to dig into, but we're talking about $8.56 an hour, $1,400 a month, $20,000 a year that we all know we couldn't make ends meet on. And we are all in this moment, I think, compelled to make sure that workers, can earn a living rate, and that their resiliency is what we're prioritizing this moment. And just like in 2004, our economy is still here, right? And a lot of people make the argument on the business side that it's strong. We didn't break in 2004 and 2005. It won't break us now. And we can't wait until conditions are perfect to do what is right. We have to do it now. And that's what I will offer.
Thank you so much. And Samantha, if you will take just about 2 minutes for your closing.
And I just want to thank Roxey and Ms. Nelson for her passion, and thank you for the opportunity to share this moment with you and have the opportunity to present two opposing sides. It's always a pleasure to be opposite somebody who is obviously so learned and so passionate about their topic. And so thank you for the opportunity, Nicholas, to meet Ms. Nelson, Roxey, in this setting. And I want to go back to that. There is no job if the business doesn't continue to survive. And I can only speak for my industries. I can speak for the restaurant industry and the hotel industry and tell you that we are in the moment we find ourselves in, which is in a national pandemic. We are in a moment where so many of my members are, we get text messages and emails of, I don't know, I may have to lay off 200, what they call their family members. And so the question that we had in March of what is the impact to our industry, that's no longer the question on the table. The question on the table is, how do we take a 76% cost increase when we're only at 25% capacity? We're barely back up and running. We're living literally, just barely getting by. And what our members tell us is that it's likely they never could have absorbed this very well, but in this moment, they absolutely cannot. And I do think there are conversations about overall success and prosperity for individuals that are ongoing and should be ongoing. I can tell you from a perspective from our association that we invest heavily in education. We have Pro-Start programs where we go into high schools and we try to equip people who don't think they're necessarily college bound, but want a successful career in the hospitality industry. And we help to prepare them and start preparing them for those careers then. That we do think that it's worthwhile as an industry to start growing talent and making it possible for people to grow and prosper in the hospitality industry. And we're very proud of those efforts. I can't speak to what is the overall solution. I can tell you that I know that ballot amendment 2 is not it. That $15 an hour is not it. At $15 an hour, it then becomes $22 an hour. It then becomes $50 an hour. At what point have we reached the minimum wage that puts us where we need to be? I think the broader conversation is one of opportunity and education. But through $15 an hour, through ballot amendment 2, what we do is we cost ourselves opportunity. We reduce hours, we reduce benefits, we increase costs for our communities, we increase costs for our seniors. Jobs are reduced, wages are reduced, women are hurt, young workers are hurt. And this is what we see. And we would ask you to oppose Amendment 2, because even though Ms. Nelson raises very important questions that need to be addressed and answered in our society, we do not feel that ballot amendment 2 is that answer. And we think that while it is very well intentioned, and let's not be dishonest, there are people that will certainly feel benefit from ballot amendment 2. It's not going to hurt everyone. There will be people that feel absolutely a benefit, but it won't be a benefit for everybody. And it will have devastating and catastrophic consequences for many.
Thank you. Ladies, on behalf of our 1,400 members, our board of directors, we want to thank you both for joining us today and for sharing your very valuable insight on Amendment 2. Thank you so much. This concludes our time together.